Session 5A is titled Strategic Intent of Adversaries. It is a two-part panel. The first will discuss the Chinese Communist Party's, the CCP's, hegemony, and the second part of the panel will address the Kremlin's strategic intent. To guide us through the CCP session are three experts, including William O'Hara, who is a senior chief China planner in the J5 Directorate at USSOCOM, Dr. Daniel Wagner, founder and CEO of Country Risk Solutions, and by popular demand, a returning speaker in our GPC series, and Dr. Jinghao Zhou, who is an associate professor of Asian Studies at Hobart William Smith Colleges in New York. Mr. O'Hara, would you lead off our discussion, please?
I'll tie that together of what is ICT, right? Is it 5G? Is it information controls? Is it smart, safe cities? Well, that's a lot of these things. So I'm going to kind of walk through some of the key goals, then I'll walk through some of the supporting points, then I'll tie it back up. So I think there's two overarching primary goals on Beijing's export model of ICTs. First is its access to markets. I mean, this is a competitive environment. A lot of the places that was already well covered, the entire continent of Africa, Latin America, Central Asia, the usual suspects. It's low cost, it's accessible to these countries. But then the point which I think what we want to key on in here is what's the strategic aspect of it that benefits Beijing. It's that preferred style of information control. I believe Ms. Elsa Kania hit on that point in the previous session of the export model. And to me, it really identifies into the four key subcomponents, which I'm going to spend my remarks on, is that ICTs directly affect information, number one, obviously, people, services, and technology. So think about that in a soft mindset. And then I also think about how many of my other colleagues in the other combatant commands or in the joint force are thinking about these things. It's not a lot. ICTs involve more than just the access to the information. It's in the technology of computers. It's implied by the conventional discussion of actually what haves and have-nots. Information is power. ICTs can shape an individual, household, firm, or nation's access, again, to information, people, services, and technology. How do I communicate with the world? How do I communicate internally? How is that data accessed? What data is accessed? And the concept of tele-access, which is kind of an old term, shapes how people access it, whether electronically, physically, and that has social and economic implications. And it's very important to me for understanding that you can't understate those four subcomponents, but then applying ideological battles to that, which was covered a little bit earlier. I mentioned what is an ICT. I'm going to read the Wikipedia definition. It's not rocket science. It makes sense to me. So it's information technology that stresses unified communications and integration of telecoms, both telephone lines and wireless signals, i.e. 5G, computers and necessary enterprise software, middleware, storage, audiovisual systems, what we're talking on here now, VTCs, that enable users to access, store, transmit, and manipulate information as well. So, what's under the umbrella of an ICT? I'm an Intel guy by trade. So smart, safe cities was a thing that popped up 2 years ago. 5G is one of those. And smart and safe cities, there's a nuanced difference in those. One's kind of an older term, smart city, the safe city, which includes access to cameras, sensor technology, geographics, demography movement, people movement, essentially the life of a city. How do you expand that out? The life of a country. To 5G, I'm not a 5G expert. I think we can go into the 5G battle. To ICT centers, and actually that brings in people, that's the people aspect, the engineers, tech, and students studying at those, to other telecom, from fiber optics, data centers, radio, et cetera, et cetera. So, why is this important? First, I mentioned social and, the technological choices of information. According to Dr. Dutton, who was an expert on this in the late 1990s, actually, he cited that ICTs can refigure not just the electronic, but the physical access of those four key components. Most commonly recognized, as we say, as information. It changes not only the way people get the information, but also the corpus of what identifies a person and how those people shape to it. You can either significantly enrich someone's life, control that, or also decrease it with information. So that gets into that second point, which is access to people. Choices are about the design and use of ICTs are made by people. Not only shape how individuals communicate with each other, but also how bureaucracies and how individuals meet. How do you stay in touch? How do you get to talk to people? Is it through email? Is it through, what is your bandwidth that you have to be able to communicate with it? Obviously, here in the U.S. government, we prefer email still a lot, but that's, kind of an outdated model. That's kind of that, and then that gets into that third point, access to services. ICTs do more than shape the way we consume information. It shapes products and services as well. But I think this is key, especially for SOF. It influences what products and services people consume and how people make choices on those. The commoditization, it's buying things. How do you use that to shape thoughts? How do you use that to shape political preferences? And ICTs from not only an economic standpoint, but even if you apply it to kind of a social structure, the previous speaker mentioned kind of subculture, cultures within a culture. You can render obsolete entire businesses or industries by creating new businesses and industries. That gets into that kind of final point that I mentioned, the technology aspect of it. It's essentially the equipment, the know-how, and the techniques. It shapes how other ICTs interconnect with not only those within borders, but those beyond. So for instance, internet, we talked about the bifurcation of that in the previous session. I mean, are we kind of moving in that bifurcation model? My opinion would be is that if you look at it from how, I mentioned some of those subcomponents of 5G, safe cities, there are prospects for that are already taking place. And what type of access to the internet do you truly have? So what are some of the benefits for the CCP and benefits for host nations? First, I'll get into benefits of the CCP. So for me, right, data, we all love data. The more data you get, you're going to build pipelines back into Beijing. Well, what does Beijing care about controlling Equatorial Guinea political process or Namibia or Zambia? I mean, they all have their own geopolitical and economic interests there, which I'm not going to dive into here. How do you shape the political outcomes you want? How do you hedge your bets? How do you ensure that, well, the party in power is getting what they want by, making sure that the opposition is getting there? That's access to information is power. You build a reliance on those systems. It's like the Microsoft model or the Apple phone up model. Well, you get a discount. You get the upgrades. Once you get them hooked, you get the upgrades. And that's, and I think the best manifestation of this, honestly, is the 5G battle. If you broaden it out to the larger ICT, 5G is just been getting a lot of attention the past couple of years. So what are the host nation benefits, right? Rapidly upgraded infrastructure with the usual Chinese caveats, no strings attached to human rights or other geopolitical interference. They create pipelines for talent and education. So take, for example, the Huawei Zambia ICT College. They receive training that qualifies them to work at the National Data Center for Zambia, run by Huawei. Huawei Cloud Solutions are the backbone to all government systems for these governments. And it's that alternative to probably a more expensive Western model. Additional benefits for China, which I'll just briefly touch on, it allows them increased market access. Domestic drivers of growth in China, how do they transform their economy? If you can keep kind of that income coming into those state-owned enterprises or state-owned affiliated enterprises, it's about market access. And then finally, where are we talking about some of this? I mean, these are the middle and developing powers of the world. Yes, we have the concerns of Europe and EU and the West or Australia, but really we're talking about the usual suspects: Central America, the entire African continent, save maybe one or two, Southeast Asia, Latin America. Essentially everywhere where there's not these, robust democracies. Some call them the middle powers, which I think is an appropriate term. So, final point I want to leave here: what are the implications for SOF, for SOCOM, and a lot of the people out here? I think the first thing is that the ability for SOF movement. Actually, if you take your cell phone somewhere, and it pings on a Chinese-backed ICT system, it's probably not a good thing. Whether you're out there, whether you're not supposed to be there, we have to be much more cognizant about our operational security. I'm not being paranoid here, but like if you go somewhere TDY, people just don't take your personal items with you because you don't know what that backbone is. The days of being faceless, maskless, having no name, that gets into also intelligence collection. Like that's going to be much more difficult. But that also presents opportunities. SOF is the eyes and ears on the ground. And the reality is that a lot of these places we're talking about, a lot of the requirements we're looking to fulfill, whether for departmental priorities, for own priorities, or national priorities, we're going to be the ones trying to figure that out. But what are we trying to figure out? Like, in SOF, we're not offering an alternative model for an ICT system. I think, we need, that part of this is understanding the local culture, the local systems. Why are they choosing these things? And then coming up with creative solutions that either offer alternatives to potential Western firms or offer alternatives to ensure that we have placement and access where we need to understand what information is or is not being passed, not only internal to the country, so we can identify those key personalities as well. It's not so much effect of, what pure GPC is back to, how we're going to counter Beijing by knowing what information they're getting. That's nice to have. What I like to think about too and focus on is that, I can talk to my friends in the, XYZ about China to the cows come home. And we've waited, years for these conversations. But it's really, to me, not losing understanding of those local systems, why people are making those choices, what information is being gathered, how are societies changing, adapting, are there opportunities to leverage advantage, right? We define here in at least the J5 of SOCOM, what is competition? It's access, influence, and leverage. Access, influence, and leverage via ICTs, I think we laid that out pretty clearly, of information, people, services, and technologies. So there's one and the same here. I view this as an opportunity for SOF to really play a significant role for the department moving forward in this area. So I cede my time back to General Howard and over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for being on time. Our next speaker is Mr. Wagner. Mr. Wagner, the floor is yours, sir.
I've been asked to speak a little bit about China's use of its economy and how it attracts markets, how it manipulates markets. Let me start by saying that the economists are almost always confounded by China, because no matter what their projections are for a hard landing or a soft landing, there's usually no landing at all. And as a result, it's obviously through government manipulation of the economy that that's even achievable. But China has created this aura of invincibility in the process. The government believes that it needs to keep all the plates spinning all the time, because if one plate comes crashing down, they may all do so. It's worth pointing out that more than 70% of China's banking market is controlled by the big four banks, being the Bank of China, the China Construction Bank, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, and the Agricultural Bank of China. These state-owned commercial banks end up skewing monetary resources towards state-owned enterprises and other privileged national corporations. This has created a breeding ground for China's large and complicated shadow banking network, which is little regulated and monitored, and it's awash with cash. So China is ultimately a country where market forces have less impact than the will of the government, meaning an oversupply of real estate can be deemed a boom if the government says it is a boom. Yet government statistics mask some hidden strengths, such as that most homes are paid for in cash, urban disposable income has risen an average of 7% per year since 2000, and real output per worker is between 10 and 12% per year, which most economies would kill for. It could therefore otherwise be argued that there are checks and balances in place in the system, whether deliberate or otherwise, that enable China's economy to maintain equilibrium. Now, that said, China's banking system has almost unlimited access to low-cost credit. That gives the state-owned banks an incentive to keep their seemingly endless cycle of high growth continuing. The government uses its phenomenal economic record to encourage inbound foreign direct investment and promote outbound Chinese investment. And a lot of international companies have long believed that they must have a presence in China because of its 1.4 billion consumers, implying that there's an endless stream of future revenue. They also, of course, have a robust middle class. Their middle class is as large as the population of the US and the European Union combined, so it's very substantial. And that's the vision upon which this whole thing is based. China possesses characteristics, though, of both developed and developing countries, and it has many things in common with a variety of countries that's enabled the government to attempt to appeal to a wide range of investors and countries, and they have done just that. Overseas foreign direct investment by Chinese state-owned enterprises is seen as unfairly competitive vis-a-vis private sector companies by virtue of the government owning and backing, and Chinese SOEs often compete investments in risky environments where Western multinationals may prefer not to operate at reduced cost, and they thereby outmaneuver Western firms. As Western multinationals generally operate based on market conditions, albeit with advantages from established reputations, technology, and industry practices, they and their home countries have come to believe that there is no longer a level playing field. So if it were not for the West's preoccupation with achieving a higher moral standard and adherence to international standards of acceptable behavior, China would not have been as successful as it has been in fostering this overseas FDI in the developing world. China is in the process of beating the West at its own game, identifying what it sees as the West's weakness on the grand chessboard and filling in the gaps where they remain. So an excellent example of this is the Belt and Road Initiative, otherwise known as the BRI, which, as some of you may know, is $1 trillion initiative that's a hugely ambitious program to promote trade and investment in some 80 countries around the world. It's recreating, if you will, a maritime Silk Road along China's sea routes and enhancing connectivity with Eurasian land routes to Europe. Officially, the BRI was labeled as an initiative because it lacked concrete goals or an institutional structure. The Chinese government, its provincial and local authorities, and the SOEs, all these companies all ended up developing their own plans for implementing the BRI, which was bound to end up resulting in a muddled and disorganized morass of clashing objectives, which it did. There's been a distinct lack of coordination from the Chinese side in the BRI, which has resulted in some projects being built in host nations that were not necessarily wanted or needed. A number of BRI host nations had previously graduated from highly indebted poor country status in the 1990s as a result of debt forgiveness, only to resume that status because they assumed loans from Chinese government banks worth tens of billions of dollars that can never be repaid. And of course, the government knew they would never be repaid when they lent the money. So the BRI is ultimately a tool whose purpose is to support the exercise of Chinese political, economic, diplomatic, technological, and military power. It is at once a means of establishing and strengthening bilateral ties, exercising regional power, promoting Chinese foreign policy, ensuring economic sovereignty, and of course, perpetuating the supremacy of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. But the BRI also represents a de facto challenge to the liberal economic development model promoted by Western nations, which emphasizes structural and policy reforms and technical assistance in sectors such as education and health, but largely ignores infrastructure. That's where the Chinese government has picked up the gap. It believes that a state-led, credit-laden infrastructure investment program will stimulate regional economic growth while creating a new form of international order in which China plays a leading role. So the BRI should therefore be thought of as a diplomatic, political, and economic strategy controlled by Beijing that empowers it to pursue its global ambitions on its own terms, unencumbered by the global legal and regulatory regime. An important part also of China's 21st century dream is to use the BRI to help create an alternative world order based on how Beijing operates at home, one which perpetuates the longevity of the CCP, maximizes the benefits that accrue to it, and combats the Western liberal order any way that it can. The BRI is enabling Beijing to greatly expand its global footprint through the exercise of soft power, while strengthening the CCP's grip on power at home, to use the, quote, cover of diplomatic assistance to secure natural resources, increase its influence over foreign governments, and to roll out the world's first state-run digital currency. And that's what I'd like to end on today, otherwise known as the Digital Currency Electronic Payments Program, the DCEP. The Chinese government understands that via blockchain, the issuance of its own cryptocurrency is an excellent way to track and record the movement of payments, goods, and people. It has the potential to revolutionize the global payment system, and assuming that it succeeds, many other countries will want to emulate it, including the US. Some other governments have already launched similar initiatives, but not on the scope or scale of the DCEP, which promises to be the first global digital currency. What appears to have spurred the Chinese government to actively pursue this is the birth of Libra, which is otherwise known as Facebook's cryptocurrency. They see it as a US attempt to dominate the cryptocurrency market. Although its motivations to counter the US are clear enough, much remains unknown about the DCEP. One has to wonder just how much focus it will have on transparency, governance, or best practices. It will not be available on cryptocurrency exchanges, nor will it be available for speculative purposes. Embracing blockchain and creating a DCEP ecosystem will give the Chinese central bank unprecedented power over capital movements, certainly in China, but also around the world. And since the Chinese government will be the first to launch this digital global currency, it will gain a considerable lead over the world's nations and provide it with the ability to perfect its surveillance capabilities in China and around the world for any countries that choose to adopt it. It will also help to internationalize the yuan and simultaneously create less dependence on the US dollar. So the Chinese government intends to stay a step ahead of the competition, enhance its ability to monitor its citizens, broaden its soft power, and increase China's appeal to other countries while countering the supremacy of the US dollar in the process. And I will stop there.
Mr. Wagner, right on time. I'm glad we invited you back.
Thank you.
Our next presenter will be Dr. Zhou. Dr. Zhou, the floor is yours.
Very general comments on the question number 3. This topic is about China's strategy toward international institutions. China's strategy is based on China's comprehensive power and CCP's vision of global order. China became the second largest world economy in 2010, and then switched its strategy from low-profile strategy to aggressive strategy. Of course, you can describe this strategy in different terms, such as assertive strategy, strong status strategy, or wolf warrior strategy. What kind of global order does the CCP like to see? Chinese scholars predict that China's rise ultimately lead to bipolar world. The Chinese leader desired to establish a multilateral world and is willing to take a lead in a global governance. Xi Jinping promised China will fulfill its dream by 2049. While some suggest that the CCP has no intention to overthrow the international institutions, others suggest that China really wanted to establish a China-centric global order. I think it's safe to say that CCP has short-term goal and long-term goal. They like to see multilateral world and bipolar world, and eventually establish a new Chinese global order. So China has joined and challenged the international institutions. At the same time, pragmatically use the international institutions. Accordingly, China is performing 3 actors: a selective participant, a potential terminate, and a free ride of international institutions. Let me briefly comment on these 3 aspects. First, China selectively participated in international institutions. China is a member of more than 200 international organizations and leads 4 out of 15 specialized agencies and the United Nations, and also hold many senior positions in global organizations. China has developed various China-led regional organizations, such as Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the Belt Road Initiative. China has tried to play a leading role in the regional organizations such as BRICS, Association of Southeast Asians, and Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation. Second, China's participation is not simply accept or follow international institutions or global order, but challenge international institutions, reshape institutions, and negotiate with the international institutions. CCP has spent $1 billion to launch a global discourse war, try to control the narrative about China, because the CCP believes that whoever controls right to speak controls the international system. The CCP reshapes the international order by redefining the meaning of international rules and silencing oppositions to gain support from international institutions through various means. The CCP negotiates with international organizations by advocating various principles, such as the principle of non-interference, the principle of multilateralism, and China core interests, and economic globalization, not political globalization, to defend the CCP's interests and the China model, so-called socialist system with Chinese characteristics. Third, number 3, China has tried to maximize its benefits from international institutions, especially in 3 areas: climate change, nuclear non-proliferation, and the trade regime. The CCP mobilized Chinese cultural political nationalism to increase its bargaining chip in the global governance, trying to get everything it wanted. China has used the UN as a platform to advance its high technology and export the China model to other countries, especially to the global South. I think it can be also argued that China has used loopholes of international institutions for taking free ride. When China joined the WTO, China made about 15 promises, but so far China has failed to fulfill many of the commitments. Financially, China used a great amount of money from international institutions to develop China's domestic and international projects. In turn, China uses money for buying global influence. Moreover, China puts high pressure on recipients of Chinese aid to get support from this country and to get diplomatic concessions. In political sphere, China has used veto power and economic influence to reject the resolution, which is unfavorable to China. That's why the UN Human Rights Council never passed a single solution condemning China's human rights situation. My conclusion is the CCP's vision, theory, action, practice are very clear. The only question is whether or not the CCP or China's PRC, whether or not is able to remake the regional and the global order. In this sense, I think the future of global order or international institutions will be largely depends on how the US and the global community respond to China's comprehensive challenges. US foreign policy toward China has failed in the past. Will the US fail again? That is a question mark. Thank you.
Thanks to all our panelists, again, all three right on time. I do have some general questions from our audience, and I have some specific questions. So, Mr. Wagner, a specific question for you. With the emergence of cryptocurrencies, where does the U.S. stand in regards to great power competition and the realities of cryptocurrency? Are we behind, in line with the competition, or ahead? What is the way ahead for cryptocurrency in regards to economic powers of the world? A three-part question. I think maybe you answered a little bit of it in your presentation, but we'd like some more specifics, please.
I think the short answer is that unfortunately the US is behind China in the cryptocurrency arena, just like it is in some other aspects of the technology race. And although there are some initiatives underway, I think it would be some time before we actually roll out a cryptocurrency. I think there's a lot of debate that a lot of people want to have before going down that road. And my concern here is that this is an instance where we're thinking about, what color shoes we want to get on while China is sprinting around the world. This is a good example of that. And I don't think we have the luxury of waiting. You could say, well, okay, Libra is going to be launched, but that's not a US government initiative. I think it was the incentive for the Chinese government to get on the horse and change their view on that and really start moving, and they are. So by the time the US and other governments get around to doing this, basically China's going to have launched it, it's going to have first mover advantage, it's going to be utilizing this widely in the BRI and other countries, and we're sort of going to be scratching our heads saying, well, why didn't we do this sooner? So I do think the economic impact, by the way, is going to be very, very substantial indeed. Just like with any new technology, I think there's some hesitancy and nobody really necessarily wants to be the first one in line to launch something like this. But then the entity that does has that first mover advantage. And I just think that the US government would be wise to debate a little bit less and have a little bit more foresight and forward thinking, forward planning for 10, 20 years from now. And if they do that, they'll be looking at this and they'll say, yeah, we need to get on that bandwagon.
So this is a general question, and I'm going to maybe ad-lib it just a little bit. So the question from the audience is, does the GPC mean that the U.S. government should consider financially supporting U.S.-based companies, much like the PRC subsidizes Chinese-based companies? If so, is the U.S. taxpayer, much less the global marketplace, ready for U.S. sovereign wealth injections into American corporations like Exxon, Mobil, Apple, and JP Morgan? I guess the bottom line of the question is, should the United States government support major corporations in the same way that Chinese-based companies are supported by the Bank of China and the other entities that were mentioned in our presentation? So I think, Mr. Wagner, we'll start with you again, but our other panelists might have some comments too.
I'll try to be brief on this. My short answer is hell yes. I think one of the reasons that China has been able to leapfrog ahead or, come close to parity with so many areas that the US previously had an advantage and a substantial lead in, is that they have that advantage of using the public and private sector together. I think when we put the public and private sector together in America, we will be unstoppable. My question is how we will actually go about doing that, how the resources can be allocated, and whether this is going to become a priority for Congress. I understand that there will be some concerns about, privacy and crossing, the walls that have been erected between the public and private sectors. But this is an economic war, and in economic war, you have to be willing to break down those types of barriers. So I'm definitely in favor of it.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Mr. O'Hara, any comments on this question?
Yeah, so I would actually pose a hypothetical, to kind of, Mr. Wagner, very good comments. Does anyone, I see what ExxonMobil, Apple, JP Morgan, we could apply it to others. I think a question here is, are these American companies, right? Like, that's the first question. But to Mr. Wagner's comment, the industry we're in, quote unquote, what are we really good at using public and private partnerships together? Lockheed Martin, right? Northrop Grumman. Is that not public-private partnership? The defense area, and I think this is one thing which, we live every day. We don't want to be caught in, to put it in military terms. So, Mr. Wagner, I'll translate a little bit. We don't want to be caught following a revolution in military affairs. Anti-ship ballistic missile, ASATs. We're playing catch-up now. Apply that same premise if we're saying if this represents how the global order is going to change, then in my personal opinion, not the opinion of US SOCOM, because we're not economists here, is yes. I think that partnership and that innovation, and you see the changes from within even the department with DIUX to DARPA to the SCOAF. There's a lot of other entities out there. For me, I think it's the ability, if you enter in that public partnership, the ability to rapidly innovate and to use a throwaway phrase, fail quickly. We've got to fail quickly and move on.
In what ways would a diffusion of manufacturing away from China, which would produce a lower growth rate in China, affect the CCP? So if you put it in dynasty, if Rod McFarquhar at Harvard often said that if the GDP fell below 6% a year in China, it would start to break apart. So the better question might be, if China loses its manufacturing powerhouse capability, what effect would that have on China?
Yeah, I think number one, the legitimacy of the CCP is largely depends on its economic performance. It means if we lose such capability to improve the living standard of Chinese people, and they cannot continue to make China nation strong and export its products to global community, they will have no sufficient financial resources. So it will be seriously affect the legitimacy of the CCP. There are a couple of things. One is in the past, let's say China's economic reform movement started in the early 1980s. Yeah, we can say in the past 3 decades or 2 decades, China's growth rate, it's about sometimes double digits, sometimes single digits, but no lower than 7% before 2011. It means China's economy grows stably in the past 3 decades. But look at how many percentage of China's GDP produced by Western investment. According to some statistics, at least probably about 30%. It means if lose such investment from Western society, China's economy would be serious trouble, then affect CCP's legitimacy. Secondly, China has become the center of manufacture. So it means China need global order and produce some products, then export. It means one is making money, making profits. Secondly, it creates jobs. If lose such status, global manufacturing center, then it indirectly creates social instability. Then such a problem also seriously affect China's CCP's legitimacy. And we already seen since 2011, China's GDP already declined. So far, it's still face serious challenge. So the government of China will take it very seriously to solve this problem. Yeah, that's my response.
Thank you very much.
General Howard, could I just add something briefly to that?
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's based on the assumption that we actually know what the actual GDP growth rate is. We just know what the Chinese government tells us it is. And we've seen with their ability to rebound from the coronavirus that they are masters at pulling rabbits out of hats. So I wouldn't underestimate their ability to recover in that regard. And I would say that they're already thinking about that possibility. I'm sure that they already have contingency plans in place. And I would argue also that the BRI is one move in the direction of establishing new relationships with governments to be able to get even more new investors in there in due course.
Thank you for that intervention. Mr. O'Hara, any comments?
Yes, General Howard. So I think Mr. Wagner just described either what is called a pyramid scheme or a multi-level marketing direct to consumer. Here, try this, sulfur-free wine. I'd actually take a contrarian view actually from Dr. Zhou, and perhaps maybe this reflects actually somewhat of even the China I know. I graduated from college in 2006, and I remember in my undergrad classes how China was this fragile thing that, the CCP legitimacy. So to me, actually, I would actually frame it of competition in the broader sense, and like how successful can you be? So to me, it's not even whether the CCP is legitimate or not. It's actually then what type of China either comes after that. Do you have a hyper-nationalist China? Does the CCP become something different? I mean, I don't think a democracy is going to work there. Whether that's the CCP or maybe it's called the KMT, like 1980s or pre-1990 Taiwan. You could use the Singapore model. Some of the term that's been used is authoritarian capitalism. That's not to say that model can't be successful. And if we look at a historical example, the thing that China brings is scale of economy, and we all know that. Similar models were actually working quite well in the 1930s. If you look at Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany, their economies were not that quite different from a lot of how the U.S. was working as everyone tried to get out of the Great Depression. This little thing called World War II happened, we know the rest, but they can scale that model out. So to me, it's, as far as are they dependent on that type of growth, I would actually submit of if we are successful in a lot of our ventures of trying to break Huawei, if we're economic decoupling, even if it's limited, partners and allies, does that actually increase the prospect of conflict because you are successful? And that forces Beijing to act, whatever that might be, conflict being solving the Taiwan problem once and for all, which I think at the plenum, it's no longer 2049, it's 2035, so they're 14 years ahead of schedule. So that actually somewhat, I think reflects where my thinking is if you can have those variables, I think about the planning aspects we need to consider, regardless of whether the CCP economy is red hot or whether it's down. I still think you have a China that we see acting kind of on the global stage that we are. It's kind of like a red dwarf. It eventually explodes.
Thank you. And we have a lot of MISO, Military Information Support Operations folks in our audience, and this one is coming from them. What are some of the weaknesses in China's quote unquote benign rise narrative? And we've heard a little bit about their narrative in previous panels. What can be amplified as competitive space? So I guess the question is, in your opinion, what can the counter narrative be internationally to compete with China's benign rise narrative? And I think, Mr. O'Hara, I think we're going to start with you on that, and I'll go to the other panelists after your comments.
That's a great question. So one phrase we actually, at least on our team here at SOCOM, we actually don't try not to use the word counter China. And that gets at, elements of larger national power and what is, to use a consulting term, what is our value proposition, not only as SOF, as the Joint Force, as the Department, as the U.S. government. But if, we are, so I think it's twofold. One, it's exposing that they're not your friends. We might not be the best of friends, but like we actually want your people to be better off. Everything flows back to Beijing. It kind of goes back to the basic needs and services of a government, right? It's to provide security, food, water, and the basics. We want that generally where we get into trouble sometimes, I think, is if you take the kind of the 1990s mindset of the the liberal international view of the world, where we go, the global policeman. We kind of see where some of that has gotten us overextended, like everyone else has done. But I think that also highlights of who we are as not only as a society, but who we are as people. The best ambassadors to me, I say, if you gave me a budget of $100,000, what would you do with it? I'd say, give it to a bunch of guys and gals to go, give out candy bars and develop and build those relationships. And placement and access for spooky things and doing great things. That's fine and all, but and that's necessary. I get that, but that doesn't matter if you don't trust those people in those countries and those people don't trust you. And we have great examples from Latin America to our European allies and partners. And not everyone's going to be an ally, but it's honesty of saying this is where our relationship is, and it's not lying. I mean, anyone who's dealt with the Chinese, either the the CCP or the PLA, in either backbenching or negotiations, like they go in, their first offer is everything they want, their second offer is everything they want. That's their negotiating strategies, and I like to think that at least as a society, we're not as crass. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Interesting. Mr. Wagner?
So I think the greatest challenge for China is not to trip up on itself. And there are a couple of recent examples where it's done that. Of course, COVID-19 being one, in its failure to be transparent and share information. The world hasn't forgotten that and is kind of pissed off. Secondarily, the backlash from the BRI for many of the host nations in terms of debt trap diplomacy and making promises that weren't kept, et cetera. Those are things that China could control that it didn't control. Vis-a-vis what we can do in response, well, I think the most important thing, the single most important thing we can do is start to repair our relationships with our allies abroad. And interesting where we are in the election right now, of course. If Mr. Biden were to get in, I think that is actually something that China would not want, which might be counterintuitive. The reason being, they can survive a trade war, they can survive a war of words. They can't necessarily spring back quickly from a repair of our alliances and a unanimity of opinion from among our allies about what course of action we would like to take in response to Chinese actions and how we would like to respond. If we're not responding in unison, that's just a gift to them, and I would like to see that change.
Thank you. Dr. Zhou?
There are several comments. One is, I think China at present time still highly depends on global community. A lot of people say China has a huge market, but at the same time, market produce what? They have to sell. They have to rely on global community. A lot of people say decoupling is a bad thing, but for China, I think scale this slogan, decoupling. That's why when the tension between the US and China escalating, then the Chinese government just de-escalating and say, we like to promote economic globalization. China cannot afford lose global market. Secondly, I think China's weakness is the financial system. At present time, the US and the Western world still control and dominate the financial system. At present time, China only has about 3 trillion foreign currency. That's a dangerous line. It's falling from 4 trillion to $3 trillion. China cannot continue to lose financial resources. Another weakness of China or CCP is, I think, it's technology and creative activities. That's why China kept sending international students from China to the US. US has about 1 million international students. Among 1 million international students, about 33% international students come from China. They want to send students to learn from the US, from Western societies, technology, sciences, and other important issues which will help China advance its technology, because China clearly understands in order to compete the US and the Western hegemony, the number one is education and the technology. That is, I think, is high technology. So I advocate when we have great power competition, the US high technology company and the Western high technology shall not help China to advance the high technology. Probably high technology company do not want to lose big market in China. This is an issue during great power competition. I think American people and the Western people have to clearly aware about this serious issue.
Thank you. We have a little more than 3 minutes left, and each panelist gets 1 minute to answer this question. What if this were a forum on great power cooperation? Give me in 1 minute anything you can think of where China and the US should now cooperate on a high level. No pressure here. 1 minute, please.
Give me the easy one first, sir. So without, parroting potentially Mr. Biden if he does become our president, I think climate would be one of those. But hear me out with that. They're not going to abide by that. They're not going to enforce. They're not going to enforce those standards. So I think, to me, whatever cooperative agreements we decide to enter upon, and I'm not saying arms control, because I know there's talks about trilateral arms control talks with the Russians. Chinese aren't going to buy off on that. It's that if we can stick with that this threatens us all, but we're actually trying to do something about it. And I think that was one of the reasons why this current administration left the Paris Climate Accords, where there's the enforcement mechanisms. So I think that gets into larger discussions about If we do cooperate with them, when and if they renege from that agreement, which most likely they will, I think this forum has discussed it and you'll probably hear about it for the next 2.5 days, it's that accountability aspect that to me is very important. And that accountability with allies, the accountability with partners, the accountability with middle powers, where you may not agree with them on everything, but I think that's one area where there's a potential. I don't think it's going to be successful, though, but if you told me that's one, that'd be my first.
Mr. Wagner, Mr. O'Hara took 15 seconds of your time, so you have 45 seconds, sir.
I'll be very brief. The two most obvious ones that I see are in disaster management. There's no reason why the two countries can't collaborate when there are global disasters to allocate resources and find a joint solution on that. The second point I would say is North Korea, because we have some common interests there. And as unlikely as that may seem at first glance, I think both sides undoubtedly have contingency plans that involve collaboration with the other.
Great answer, sir. Dr. Zhou, you have 1 minute and 6 seconds for your answer.
My comments are very brief. Cooperation always good and beautiful, but when we say cooperation, don't forget competition. Which one is the main point? You focus on what? Then cooperation what? In what area? Military, economy, technology, or what? And the cooperation, what is purpose? The purpose is for what? Purpose, national interest is top priority. Cooperation is for competition. In the future of the global order, the multiple order or bipolar order, or just a single unipolar order. That's a question mark. So in my understanding, cooperation is good, but it's difficult. And I remember one scholar suggests probably in the future will become a normal. That is competitive coexistence. But what is about it? I don't know what is about it. We will see probably because at this time, many people still try to reject we are in Cold War. In fact, in my view, it is in Cold War. The only question is how we apply right approach to solve these problems. Can we still apply the first Cold War approach to solve this problem, or we should implement new approach? If it's necessary, then what kind of new approach? Cooperation, simplest engagement, it's a failed. We have to redefine engagement, cooperation. So otherwise, meaningless. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panel, for being on time. Thank you for a great discussion. Appreciate it very much. We hope to have you back someday. Thank you.
Thanks.